The bullet had torn through Marcus Chun's shoulder, sending him tumbling into the dense Vietnamese undergrowth as automatic fire erupted from all directions above his head. Blood soaked through his torn fatigues as he pressed himself deeper into the mud, fighting to control his ragged breathing. The year was 1968, and Sergeant Chun had been leading his squad through what intelligence claimed was a cleared zone near the Mekong Delta. The ambush had scattered his men like leaves in a hurricane. Now, alone and wounded, he could hear boots moving through the jungle around him. Deliberate, methodical, hunting. His radio crackled softly against his chest. Bravo 7. This is Firebase Charlie. Report your status, over. Marcus didn't dare respond. The enemy was too close. Instead, he switched it off and buried it under rotting leaves, along with his weapon. Playing dead was his only chance. The footsteps grew closer. Voices speaking Vietnamese drifted through the thick canopy. Marcus had picked up enough of the language during his tour to understand fragments. American ... wounded. Search the area. His heart hammered against his ribs as shadows moved just meters away. A twig snapped directly above his hiding spot. Marcus held his breath as a figure emerged from the green maze of vegetation. The man was young, maybe early 20s, wearing the simple black clothing and sandals of the Viet Cong. An AK-47 hung across his shoulder. Their eyes met for one frozen moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. The Vietnamese soldier raised his weapon slowly, deliberately. Marcus closed his eyes, thinking of his wife Sarah back in San Francisco, of the letter he'd started writing her the night before, but never finished. He thought of his unborn child, due in 3 months, a child who would grow up without ever knowing their father. But the shot never came. When Marcus opened his eyes, the soldier was kneeling beside him, examining his wounded shoulder with surprising gentleness. The man's dark eyes held an expression Marcus couldn't decipher, not hatred, but something else entirely. Something almost like recognition. "You are hurt badly," the soldier said in heavily accented English, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your people, they will come for you?" Marcus nodded weakly, not trusting his voice. The soldier reached into a small pouch and withdrew a field-dressing American issue, likely taken from another battlefield. With practiced efficiency, he began binding Marcus's wound, working quickly, but carefully. The touch of his hands was surprisingly gentle. "My name is Duck," he said quietly as he worked. "I have brother in Saigon. He work with Americans. Good man." His fingers paused for a moment. "Maybe you have brother too?" "A sister," Marcus whispered, not understanding why he was answering. She's a nurse. In Chicago." Duck nodded as if this explained everything. He finished the bandaging and sat back on his heels. In the distance, voices called out in Vietnamese his comrades, searching for him. "I must go," Duck said, rising to his feet. He looked down at Marcus with those same unreadable eyes. "You? Stay quiet until your people come. Tell them." He paused, searching for words. "Tell them not all enemies are what they seem." 27 years later, Marcus Chun sat in his study in Portland, Oregon, staring at a photograph that had arrived in the morning mail. The return address was from the Vietnam Veterans Association, and the accompanying letter had shaken him to his core. The study walls were lined with memories of his post-war life, his engineering degree from Oregon State, photos from his wedding. To Sarah, newspaper clippings from the construction projects he'd managed across the Pacific Northwest. But none of those accomplishments had ever quieted the questions that haunted his sleep. For years after returning from Vietnam, Marcus had struggled with survivor's guilt. Why had he lived when so many of his brothers in arms had not? The nightmares came in waves, sometimes absent for months, then returning with crushing intensity. He'd tried therapy, medication, meditation, even hypnosis. Nothing had worked until he'd made a decision that changed everything. He would find the man who had saved him. The search had become an obsession. Marcus had learned Vietnamese, studied the region's history, corresponded with dozens of veteran organizations on both sides of the former conflict. He'd traveled to Washington, D.C. 3 times to dig through military archives, spent thousands of dollars on private investigators, and even attempted to contact former North Vietnamese officials through diplomatic channels Sarah had supported him through it all, even when the search consumed their savings and dominated their conversations. "You need to find him," she'd said during one of their late-night talks. "Not just for yourself, but for what he represents. You need to know that goodness existed in that terrible place. Dear Mr. Chun, we received your inquiry about locating former North Vietnamese soldiers from the Mekong Delta region. The attached photograph was recently donated to our reconciliation program by a veteran's family." The subject identified himself as Duck and mentioned, "Saving an American soldier in 1968. We thought you might want to see this." The photograph came to us through a former Marine who served in the same region. He had been part of a medical assistance program in the 1990s and befriended several local healthcare workers. One of them gave him this photograph and told him the story of how this man had once spared an American soldier's life during the war. The Marine held on to it for years, hoping to find the right person to share it with. We've included contact information for the clinic where this photograph was taken. Please let us know if this helps with your search. Sincerely, the VVA Reconciliation Committee. The photograph showed an older Vietnamese man standing beside a small medical clinic in what appeared to be rural Vietnam. His hair was gray now, his face lined with age, but the eyes were unmistakable. Those same dark, gentle eyes that had looked down at Marcus in his darkest moment. Marcus's hands trembled as he reached for his phone. For nearly 3 decades, he had searched for this man, the enemy who had shown him mercy when mercy was unthinkable. He had written letters to government agencies, contacted veteran organizations, even hired private investigators. All dead ends. His wife Sarah had passed away 5 years earlier from cancer. The last months had been difficult, but she had remained optimistic until the end. Their daughter Jennifer was now a doctor herself, working with Doctors Without Borders. In places where conflict had left deep scars, she had inherited her mother's compassion and her father's determination to make sense of suffering. "Dad," Jennifer had said during their last conversation before Sarah's passing, "Mom told me about your search for the Vietnamese soldier. She said it's not really about finding him. It's about finding peace with what happened over there." Sarah had understood Marcus in ways he sometimes didn't understand himself. During their 43 years of marriage, she had watched him wrestle with questions that had no easy answers. Why had he survived when his squad leader, Tommy Martinez, hadn't? Why had Duck shown mercy when mercy was the last thing anyone expected in war? The nightmares had been worst in the early years. Marcus would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, convinced he could still hear the voices of his fallen comrades, calling for help. Sarah would hold him until the trembling stopped, never complaining about the lost sleep or the way his war seemed to invade their peaceful life in Oregon. "You're not the same man who went to Vietnam," she had told him once, years after the worst of the symptoms had subsided. "But you're not the man who came back either. You're someone else now, someone who understands things that most people never have to learn." In her last letter, she had written, "Dad, you always taught me that good people exist everywhere, even in the darkest places. Maybe it's time you prove that to yourself." Those words had driven Marcus to intensify his search. He had reached out to documentary filmmakers, historians, and journalists who had covered the war. He had posted messages on veteran forums and social media groups. He had even contacted the Vietnamese embassy in Washington, D.C., though they had politely explained that finding one individual from the war era would be nearly impossible. Letter from the Veterans Association included a phone number for the clinic. Marcus dialed the international code for Vietnam, his heart racing as the connection clicked through. Xin Chao? A voice answered in Vietnamese, double quotes, hello, . I'm looking for a man named Duck. He would be in his 70s now. He saved my life in 1968. There was a long pause. Then, in that same accented English, he remembered Marcus? Sergeant Marcus Chun? The reunion happened 6 weeks later at the small clinic in the Mekong Delta, the same region where they had first met. Marcus had flown halfway around the world, his daughter Jennifer insisting on accompanying him. The journey had been arduous, 2 flights to reach Ho Chi Minh City, then a long drive through countryside that looked both familiar and foreign to Marcus's older eyes. Jennifer had taken a leave of absence from her work to make the trip. This is important, Dad, she had said when he protested that she didn't need to come. This isn't just your story. It's our family's story. Mom would have wanted to be here. The village had changed dramatically since 1968, where Marcus remembered only jungle and a few scattered huts. There was now a proper town with paved roads, electricity, and modern buildings. The clinic itself was a modest 2-story structure, painted in cheerful yellow, with solar panels on the roof and a small garden in front where patients waited under the shade of banana trees. The moment he stepped off the dusty bus in the village, he saw Duck waiting for him. The recognition was instant, despite the decades that had passed. Duck had aged gracefully. His hair was silver now, his face deeply lined, but he carried himself with the same quiet dignity Marcus remembered from their brief encounter in the Bola jungle. Local children had gathered to watch the reunion, their curious faces peering around corners and from behind their mothers' skirts. It wasn't every day that an American veteran came to their village, and word had spread quickly through the community. The years had changed them both, but Duke's smile was exactly as Marcus remembered it, warm, genuine, tinged with a sadness. That spoke of losses too numerous to count. My friend, Duck said, embracing Marcus like a long-lost brother, his voice thick with emotion. I wondered if you survived. I wondered if you lived good life. I wondered if you ever thought of that day in the jungle. Every day, Marcus replied, his own voice breaking. I've thought about it every single day. Over the next 3 days, they shared their stories. Duck had indeed lost a brother in the war, not the one in Saigon he had mentioned, but another who had been conscripted just weeks before the conflict ended. After the war, he had become a medic, then a doctor, dedicating his life to healing in the same jungles where he had once carried a weapon. During those conversations, Marcus learned about the complexity of Duke's wartime experience. Duck had been a school teacher before the war, passionate about literature and poetry. He could recite verses from Vietnamese classical poets and had even written some poetry himself. The war had interrupted his studies at the University of Hue, where he had been pursuing a degree in education. I never wanted to fight, Duck admitted, as they sat beside the clinic on the second evening, watching the sun set over the rice paddies that stretched to the horizon. But my village was occupied. My family was threatened. I had no choice but to join resistance. Many of us were not soldiers by choice. We were teachers, farmers, students. War made us into something we never intended to be. Marcus nodded, understanding, more than he could have 40 years earlier. I thought I was fighting for freedom, for democracy. I didn't understand. I didn't understand that you were fighting for your home, for your family, for your very survival. They talked late into the night about their children, their losses, their dreams that had been shaped by those terrible years. Duck showed Marcus pictures of the medical students he had trained, the vaccination programs he had helped establish, the clean water projects that had transformed the region. The clinic treated hundreds of patients each month, many of them children who had never known war. After the war ended, Duck explained, I realized that healing was more important than fighting. I had seen too much pain, too much death. I wanted to spend the rest of my life creating life, not taking it. Jennifer had been quiet during most of these conversations, but on the second evening, she spoke up. You both found your way to healing. She said, my father became an engineer, building things instead of destroying them. You became a doctor, saving lives instead of taking them. Maybe that's what war taught you, that creation is more powerful than destruction. You saved more than my life that day, Marcus said finally. You saved my faith in humanity. Duck smiled, but there was something in his expression a shadow that Marcus couldn't quite place. On the final day, as Marcus prepared to leave, Duck handed him a small package wrapped in rice paper. Open it when you return to America, he said quietly. It will help you understand. The flight back to Portland felt like a journey through time itself. Marcus clutched the package in his hands, afraid to open it, afraid of what it might contain. Jennifer watched him with concern as they descended through the clouds toward home. The long flight had given them both time to process what they had experienced in Vietnam. Dad, Jennifer said, as they waited for their connecting flight in San Francisco, I want you to know that meeting Duck changed something for me, too. I've been working in conflict zones for years, but I never really understood what you went through until I saw you with him. The way you both looked at each other, it was like you were seeing ghosts, but also seeing hope. Marcus squeezed his daughter's hand. Your mother would have loved meeting him, he said quietly. She always believed that people were essentially good, even in the worst circumstances. Duck proved that to me. The package felt heavier with each mile they flew away from Vietnam. Marcus had carried it carefully through airport security, explaining to curious officials that it contained personal photographs and letters. But he sensed there was more to it than that, something that would complete a circle that had been open for nearly 3 decades. That night, in the privacy of his study, Marcus finally unwrapped Duke's gift. The rice paper fell away to reveal not just one item, but several, each carefully preserved. Inside was a faded photograph, black and white, creased with age. It showed a young Vietnamese woman holding a baby, standing beside a man in civilian clothes. Both were smiling, unaware of the tragedy that would soon befall them. On the back, in careful English handwriting, my wife Lynn and our son Anne, both lost to American bombing, 1967. I could have taken revenge on you, Marcus, but revenge would not bring them back. Only mercy could heal what war had broken. Marcus sank into his chair, the photograph trembling in his hands. All these years, he had thought himself saved by a moment of inexplicable kindness. He had never imagined the depth of loss that had made that kindness possible. But there was more in the package. A letter, written in the same careful handwriting, along with what appeared to be pages from a journal entries written in both Vietnamese and English. There was also a small wooden figurine, carved in the shape of a bird, and a pressed flower between sheets of tissue paper. The letter was written in the same careful handwriting. My dear friend Marcus, I have carried a secret for 40 years, and now I must share it with you, not to burden you, but to free us both from the weight of unspoken truths. The day I found you in the jungle, I was not on patrol with my unit. I was deserting. I had decided to leave the war, to try to reach my brother in the South and flee to America. The bombing that took my wife and child had broken something inside me that could not be repaired by fighting. The wooden bird I have included was carved by my son Anne. He was only 2 years old, but already showed such creativity, such joy in making things with his small hands. The flower is from my wife's garden. She grew them behind our house, somehow finding beauty even in the midst of war. When I saw you there, Wounded and helpless, I saw myself. Another young man caught in a war he did not fully understand, fighting, for reasons that seemed clear from a distance, but became muddy up close. I could have left you to perish and continued my escape. Instead, I chose to help you, and in that moment, I found something I thought I had lost forever: my humanity. I never left Vietnam, Marcus. After I helped you, I returned to my unit. I served until the end of the war, not because I believed in victory, but because I had remembered that there was still good to be done, even in the darkest places. You gave me that gift, my friend. You reminded me that mercy is stronger than revenge, that healing is more powerful than hatred. The clinic. Where you found me? It stands on the exact spot where my village once was, where my wife and son perished. Every life we save here is a testament to the choice we both made that day in the jungle, to choose compassion over conflict, understanding over anger. I have one more gift for you, my friend. A truth that I hope will bring you peace, as it has. Brought me peace. Marcus turned to the final page, his hands shaking. The intelligence that led your squad into that ambush was deliberately false. Someone in your own command structure had been selling information to the highest bidder, not to help either side win, but to profit from the chaos of war. Your men died not for freedom or democracy, or even for their country. They died because someone saw an opportunity to make money from their sacrifice. I learned this years later, when Vietnamese and American investigators began working together to account for missing soldiers. The officer responsible was never prosecuted. He had covered his tracks too well, and by the time the truth emerged, he had died of natural causes, taking his secrets with him. I tell you this not to cause you pain, but to free you from the guilt I know you have carried. You are not responsible for what happened to your squad that day. You are as much a victim as they were. But here is the real truth, Marcus, the one that has taken me 40 years to understand fully. None of it matters now. Not the politics, not the corruption, not even the tragedy of our losses. What matters is what we choose to do with the time we have left. What matters is that, in the middle of hell, two enemies chose to see each other as human beings. That choice changed everything. Marcus set the letter down and looked out his window at the lights of Portland stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, young men and women were preparing for deployments to new conflicts, carrying the same hopes and fears he had carried. To Vietnam. Somewhere, enemies were discovering that the face of their opponent looked disturbingly like their own. He picked up his phone and dialed his daughter's number. Jennifer? It's Dad. I've been thinking about your work with Doctors Without Borders. I want to help. I want to do something that matters. What did you have in mind? She asked, her voice warm with curiosity. Marcus looked down at the photograph of Duke's lost family, then at the letter that had revealed the true cost of war. I want to build bridges, he said quietly. I want to build healing where there used to be hatred. And I think I know just where to start. The next morning, Marcus began making calls to veteran organizations, medical charities, and international aid groups. Within 6 months, the Shun Duke Foundation for War-Affected Communities had been established, with clinics planned for 3 countries still recovering from recent conflicts. The Foundation's mission statement, written jointly by Marcus and Duck, over video calls that bridged 12 time zones, was simple. In every conflict, there comes a moment when enemies must choose between revenge and redemption. We choose redemption. But the real truth, the one that both men carried in their hearts, but never spoke aloud, was simpler still. Sometimes the enemy who saves your life isn't saving you from death. Sometimes they're saving you from becoming someone you were never meant to be.